Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host as always, Jay Nichol. So I'm kind of traveling in time because I'm recording this intro after we've already done the podcast. Me and Nolan kind of just started talking and it was flowing and I didn't want to interrupt it with some clunky intro. So I just let the conversation roll. You're about to hear a conversation I had with Nolan Osborne. Nolan is an accomplished hunter, guide, and co-host of the Beyond the Kill podcast and works closely with the team at the Journal of Mountain Hunting, is one of the key players over there. Nolan is very well known and regarded in the British Columbia hunting industry and just an overall really great guy. When I decided to do my goat hunt last year, I knew he had done it previously and I reached out to him and he was more than happy to have a phone call with me. And that was before he knew anything about me or we'd even met. So I've always kind of really appreciated who Nolan is as a person. And we had a great conversation. So if you could take a moment and engage with the podcast, like, comment, share, subscribe, leave a review on iTunes or Spotify, that would be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Nolan Osborne. And I think too, something you said that I really resonated with me. So I came from the forestry engineering background. Mm-hmm. So I'd spent 15 years in the mountains of British Columbia, like leading crews of people in remote locations and getting dropped off in helicopters on top of mountains and being picked up on the river bottoms at the end of the day. And I was very, very comfortable by myself in the mountains in very treacherous conditions, so that when I got exposed to backcountry hunting, I almost felt like it was a bit of a cheat code, because all of the stuff that was just non-hunting, I felt super familiar with. And so I could just take all of my energy and focus just on acquiring those hunting skills. And that's something I try and share with people too, because most people who are coming into this don't have any of that other shit. So it's like, not only are you trying to learn how to go hunt in treacherous conditions, you're just trying to survive out there. Like literally just getting from A to B is one of the toughest things you may have ever done in your life. And it may be the first time that you found yourself in these types of situations. But I do find that people who had some type of really intense mountain-related sporting or work background get a super elevated ramp up into backcountry hunting. And in their second, third year, they're going out there like guys who've been doing it for 7, 8, 9 years. Mm-hmm. Still lacking, it still takes a longer to develop that real keen hunting skill. And I still feel like I'm light years from that, but at least being able to put together a thoughtful 2-week backcountry trip is seems really easy to me these days. That part is not difficult. You know what I mean? The logistics and getting in and getting out and where to camp, all that stuff comes as second nature now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting too. And I'm I know I sometimes hunt. I hunt with a bunch of, a wide range of experience in my friends. And some of them it's kind of very much low level experience, and some guys backpack for sheep every single year and are really good with that stuff. But it always sort of that element of it surprises me, because that's definitely something I take for granted. Yes. You do some, especially with a couple backpack goat hunts in February and stuff. Once you can do that, or hey, navigation, survival, and finding good campsites is no longer an issue, then it really frees up the rest of your mind to just focus on the task at hand. And then there's lots of times I don't even, I won't pore over maps super hard or really pick hey, this camp location. I'll look at the maps, get a visual of what I think the terrain's going to look like, and then be all right, well, we'll just hunt it, right? You go in and whatever's there is there. And you just, and I think that's I think I've just seen myself start to, in the last 2 years, really with guiding, fall more into that, where I'm not worrying about trying to find the animal. I'm just hunting. Yeah. And it's been great. It's been a blast. It's been, not to say that I've got everything dialed down or anything like that, but just feeling confident enough. You're hey, I can go into an area and just hunt it how it should be hunted. and not be so worried about, well, what if I'm doing this? What if I'm doing that? Where should I camp here? Or where's there going to be water? Or, you just kind of like, hey, we'll just figure it out. And
that is a very interesting insight, because I still feel like there's times when the hunt that I've prepared for isn't the hunt that I show up to. And there's this like pivot period where like sometimes I'm good at it and I'm able to get around at it and I'm able to like come at it from a new angle and like figure out what's going on. And other times I'm not, like, and I just fail and it just doesn't work out for me because I'm not able to, maybe I don't have enough time or whatever. I'm just not able to regroup and reposition. But I really like that kind of perspective, because it's just showing up in what the hunt, because we do have these like preconceived notions.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of important, especially in the beginning. You got to have some type of plan. You can't just go out there and wing it. And I think what you're talking about is that almost elevating to that unconscious competence where it's like, you not only have a plan, but you have so many plans that now they're just sitting back there waiting for you. And that as the countryside unfolds, your brain is kind of flipping through those and like, okay, I've been in this kind of situation before. And last time we were here, we did that and that really worked out good, or this didn't work out so good. So we'll try like a slightly, and we don't even really think about all of those things. Like, and then it just comes out as your hunt plan and your reaction. So I really like that. That's going to be a bit of a goal of mine moving forward. I like that. Showing up and just hunting the hunt that is there and not forcing the hunt that you were expecting on the area when it might not be the hunt that you should be hunting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it can go both ways, right? Like you said, I mean, it's good to have, especially if you're not super experienced. Like when I say, oh, you just show up and hunt an area, it's like, well, that's coming from someone who spends 150 days hunting a year, does it professionally, have been in all kinds of scenarios and stuff like that. So it's easy to say, in the same way that I don't know. I was going to make some gym analogy, but I don't know enough about gym stuff to even do that. So, but yeah, it is one of those things. Like you have to have that, you have to have a pretty high competence level, I think, to be able to achieve that. But even I think if people try and do that in maybe in a smaller area, like maybe you're just going out and hunting for the day, and instead of getting really, spun out on like, okay, well, I have to be at this place by this time. And then if I'm not there, then I can't get up to there. And it's like just kind of taking a step back and being like, look, hunting is just me taking in data, processing it, and making the best available, best decisions that I have available to me. And the only way you get better at that is by continuing to do that, right? And continuing to put yourself in those situations. So I think especially like it's interesting now, especially for me on personal hunts, like if it's not a draw tag or something quote unquote special, if I'm just out hunting, mule deer hunting or blacktail hunting or stuff like that, it's become quite fun. Just sort of like, hey, I'm just going to go out and whatever, and just roll with the punches. Right. And I think that's probably the biggest thing with guiding is like, there's just so many, like you think one thing's happening and then you have a horse wreck or someone else needs this, or you suddenly don't have a wrangler, or, someone tells you, hey, well, I actually want you to go, like the outfitter tells you, well, you're actually going to go 80 kilometers to the south and hunt sheep down there in a spot you've never even looked at before. So there's all those elements that I think it's one of those things, like if you stay in the industry, you really just have to get good at rolling with, whatever comes to you. And, but at the same time, like shit, man, that's how the wolves hunt, right? They don't have fat maps and all this shit. Like, okay, this time of year, they just roll into an area and, take everything in, process it and pick it apart.
I think too, something else you said about the kind of taking the stress off on the personal hunts. I have only just recently in the last couple of hunts got to the point where I don't feel the same obligation to produce or like this anxiety that I'm going to come home empty-handed, and that like says something about me as a hunter. And like it ruins trips for me. It has ruined trips for me. Like I get so stressed out that I'm not going to, and I don't do easy hunts. So it's like I fail a lot. And that used to really get to me. And it's only been in the last couple, and I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think I've just I've been successful enough that I don't feel like I have to prove myself anymore. And it's like, sometimes the cards just aren't dealt your way. And no matter what you were going to do, and this is one of my favorite things about hunting, because coming from a guy who's like pretty focused and pretty successful and like normally gets my way because I'm willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. Hunting doesn't give a shit about that. Like, I like to say you could do everything perfectly. And if you don't have that 5-10% luck break your way, you're going home empty handed no matter what you did.
Yeah, you can't be 100% successful every time.
And that's what I love about it, because it forces you to like choke that failure pill every now and then. No matter how good you are, no matter how good you think you are, you're still going to go home empty handed every now and then.
Absolutely. I think it is great. It's humbling. You know, and that's really what pushes both of us to keep at it, right? It's like, if you didn't have those, then it wouldn't. I know that's like kind of a cliche thing. Everybody says that, but it is true. It's hard sometimes for new hunters to hear that, because they're like, hey, I'm on year 3 and I haven't killed a deer. Like, fuck you guys. You're like, oh, it's nice to come home unsuccessful sometimes. But yeah, I mean, you are right? It's like you get enough of that behind you. And certainly I think I used to feel that way when it came to guiding. Like, for my personal
That's got to be a tough one, man. I would find that difficult, because there's a business relationship, there's an obligation, and the type of stuff you're guiding. Like, I've never even been around those types of hunters who have paid that type of money to, like, that's just a whole other world that, like, I've been on, like, you know, $3,000-$4,000 guided hunts, like some black bears and some coos deer. And like, well, if you don't get anything, you don't get anything. It's like, but like guys showing up who are paying like 60, 70, 80 grand for sheep and stuff. Like, that's just like, and maybe they're cool as shit. And maybe 70 grand to those guys is like 5 grand to me. I don't know, but that's a weird spot to be, man.
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure. There is. I think you have to be good at guiding, you have to be comfortable with that, right? And certainly, like, you know, I think the first sheep hunt I guided was certainly like, the price of that hunt was a good chunk more than I knew I was going to make that entire year. So like, it's a little bit of a mind fuck with that, where you're like, okay, I have 2 weeks to make good on this guy who just spent more than my year's earnings. And you're kind of like, but it's like anything, right? Like, if you just stew in the pressure and you let that build up, it's going to be the monkey on your back, and you're never gonna, like, you just have to kind of be like, look, you know, in my case, it's like the outfitter obviously feels competent, like his business and how his business comes across, and it's, its reputation is obviously important to him. And if he feels that I'm competent enough to do this, then I'm fucking competent enough to do this. And I'm going to do, there's always going to be that element, like you said, of luck, and you can't guarantee it. But the way I've always looked at it is like, I can't control weather, I can't control animals, but I can always control the kind of experience that my client's going to have in my camp. So if they can walk away from that and say, hey, if we weren't successful, this guy busted his ass for me every single day, was great to talk to, was engaged and polite and da-da-da-da-da-da. It's like, if I can have that person walking away feeling like, I had a great, it sucks that I didn't get a sheep say, but I had a fantastic time and I'd love to spend time in camp with him again. Like, that's the most success you can look for, I think, as a guide, because you can't bat 100%.
No. Okay, so let's back it up a little bit, because I think this is perfectly segueing into kind of where I was hoping it was going to go. So when did you initially get exposed to hunting? Like, do you come from a hunting family?
Not like conventionally. No, my uncle, my mom's, two of my mom's brothers hunted. Spent quite a bit of time around them as kids, but I didn't grow up like, shooting pellet guns and going grouse hunting or anything like that. I think I was probably 15 years old, and my uncle invited me at Thanksgiving. He said, like, hey, I've talked to your folks and they're down with it. I've hunted my whole life. You want to come out and experience this? I'd love to take you, no pressure. So I went out black powder hunting. I went in the muzzleloader season, probably early December or something in Ontario.
Where is in Ontario? Okay.
In Ontario. Yeah. So like southern Ontario, just like an hour, 3 hours north of Toronto.
Okay.
that's kind of where I grew up. So we went out hunting private property. I just sat there on it. Like he basically sat me and was like, hey, you don't move anywhere, blah, blah, blah. And never saw a deer. I think we went out for a couple of days or maybe even just one afternoon. I don't remember, but never saw a deer, was hooked. Like I was always, as a kid, I was big on like nature, wildlife, really interested in that kind of stuff. So for me, it was kind of like this whole new world. I spent tons of time. I grew up like outside all the time, skiing, mountain biking, skateboarding and stuff like that, but never really in the woods. Like didn't do a lot of fishing or anything like that. My dad had a big sports background, but not so much like, the outdoors, canoeing and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of sort of how I got into it. And then, I just really there was just like a switch was flipped on. And for me, it was just really consuming. I worked landscaping all through high school, and it's for my best friend's older brother. And he ended up becoming one of my best hunting partners. But he was big. He's like 6 years older than me, 8 years older than me. And so he was big on like reloading and hunting and all this kind of stuff. He was in his early 20s at the time. And, so we were always, at work and stuff, we're always talking reloading and ballistics, and I'm asking questions about this hunting and that hunting. And so his family, they lived down the street from me. His dad hunted as well. And his family's kind of like a second family to me. And so I spent a bunch of time with my buddy Cam's older brother, Trev, and his father hunting with them, and then with my uncle as well. But I wouldn't say I like really dove into it until I was like 18 and could get fully like as an adult license, get your own firearm in Canada and all that kind of stuff. And then I just like went balls to the wall, like every free minute I had in the hunting season, I was hunting. I was skipping. I went to college for like applied photography, commercial photography.
Okay.
And so, I'd be skipping like any Fridays and stuff I could. I'd be like, don't worry, Mom, we don't have anything going on. Like I'm going to go up and go hunting with my uncle, goose hunting or deer hunting, kind of anything we could. And the bulk of my experience was actually like waterfowl and turkeys. I shot 2. Is that right? Yeah. 2 deer while I still lived in Ontario.
Okay.
A doe and a small buck. And then went through some kind of changes. Like I ended up working as a fisheries technician, research technician in the fisheries department at the University of Western in London, Ontario. For my buddy Cam, his middle brother, Mike, was doing a PhD in Chinook salmon in the Great Lakes. Okay. And we'd spent a bunch of time hunting together. And he's like, hey man, I'd love to have you as a research tech, and I didn't have a background in science. I never even took grade 12 science. He was just like, I know you're good in the field. I know like long hours and shitty conditions don't bother you. That's really what I'm after on this. We're going to be doing a bunch of field work, collecting, salmon data and eggs and sperm and stuff like that. So anyways, I got into that, and I was living downtown Toronto at the time, like in east, kind of just east of downtown around the beaches. And it was a little bit of like, I almost didn't do it because I remember thinking to myself, like, well, I went to school for commercial photography. I really enjoyed it. And I'm just starting to get more traction, like freelance assisting for different photographers in the city. And like, do I really want to, after, 3 years pushing into this industry, do I really want to just abort my place downtown Toronto and go fuck around in the bush? And then I had a great moment of clarity where I was like, well, every time I'm like, every free chunk that I have, if I know I don't have an assistant gig for 3 days, I'm back up in Barrie where I grew up, and I'm out building duck blinds in the swamp or setting up tree stands or limbing stuff or scouting, shed hunting, anything I can. And it was just kind of like, well, shit, why wouldn't I get paid to do this? Like, even if it's just a short stint. Originally it was going to be a 6-month contract. And I think that was the moment for me where that like really changed how I viewed what I wanted to do sort of as a career. And I didn't land on hunting right away, but it definitely opened that door. And I ended up doing a year with Western. I finished up my 6-month contract and then did another contract with the guy who's a master's student there. Same lab, same rivers and stuff like that. And then once that was done, it was kind of, I think at that point, like maybe halfway through that, I actually went to visit my sister in Vancouver, and she had moved there a couple of years before. And basically, and, you know, we're super tight. We grew up close. We're like 2 years apart in age. And she was like, hey, you know, you should move out west. Like, what the fuck else are you doing? Basically, I was like 20, I would have been maybe 22 at the time. Right.
Okay.
And I always wanted to, like, I always loved BC. We'd come out here when I was a kid skiing. And the first time I ever was in BC, like, I fell in love with it. The mountains were amazing, especially coming from a kid who's like interested in, you know, skiing, mountain biking, and nature. And then you arrive in BC and you're like, okay, well, why do I live in this pan flat place that's has okay recreation, but BC's the man.
Yeah, I grew up at Blue Mountain in Collingwood, bro.
Oh, like there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
so I grew up hunting in Barrie and then Owen Sound. So just up.
I was born in Owen Sound.
Have we talked about that?
We haven't. Okay. When Adam first had me on the journal, I'm sure he asked where I was from. So you probably have like some subconscious awareness that I was there. But it's funny you talked about Barrie. I used to live in Barrie. I used to live in London. I was the network administrator for the new VR for the computer system at the television station, the new VR at Barrie.
Dude, I haven't heard that in years.
Yeah, man. Yeah, so that's my neck of the woods. Like I lived all over those areas. We tended to go hunt like North Bay. So my family, it was once a year moose hunt. Nothing happened the rest of the year. And it was a wall tent at the end of a logging road. Pretty decent setup, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like kerosene heaters and cots and like a lot of beer. But they got after it. Like, didn't matter how hungover you were, you rolled out of bed at 4:30 in the morning and you went and found some asshole swamp somewhere and you sat there gnawing on steak bones from the night before, hoping some fucking moose, because there's 18 guys in one tag, you know, somebody's gonna see a moose. Like that was, you know, the 2 years that I had that before I had like a falling out with my old man was kind of in that North Bay.
I do remember all this from
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it's funny. Yeah. We are from very similar locations
for sure
in Ontario. And I can relate almost wholeheartedly. The only difference for me is that I'd actually already spent a great deal of time in Thunder Bay doing my degree at Lakehead. And the Northern Lake Superior region is like pretty intense.
For sure.
Like topographically. And so if I had not have spent time there and it went straight from Southern Ontario to BC, I would have had like that awe, like what the fuck is this? But I feel like Northern Ontario is pretty severe. And it wasn't quite as dramatic, but I did feel instantly at home. I was like, oh, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. You know, and I got here at 23 and that was 20 years ago. And except for 2 years I lived in Australia, I've never left. Like I've visited back home, but I wouldn't even remotely consider living anywhere else in the world other than BC.
Couldn't agree more. I was just talking with my folks about that. I was back in Ontario for like 3 weeks through December.
Okay.
Visiting family, which was great.
Yeah.
But you know, my folks and my uncle who I hunted with and stuff, my fiance and I went out there and I took her out to the farm that we always hunt, like my uncle and my aunt's farm. And, you know, some of those places that she's heard all of these things, like, oh, she knows I've been here, but it doesn't have a visual. So we got to do that. And my uncle was kind of asking me, he's like, well, you know, do you think you'd ever move back? I'm like, no, man, like it's too good.
It's too good. It's too good. I'm actually, I'm going to get into this probably next week, but I brought my old man out once before and we took him up the Muskwa on a jet boat and he's coming back out again this year. He's going to be 66 and we're going to do a fly-in caribou hunt.
Nice.
But it just like blows his, like he comes out for these things and he's just like, what the fuck, man? Like it's crazy. It just blows his mind compared to, you know, what we used to do hunting and the type of terrain that he's used to, and just the remoteness of it all and the expanse. Like your brain in Ontario, you just can't comprehend, man.
Yeah.
Like you just never get that far away from people. You can't physically, it's impossible. Some of those, like I've done some tree planting shit like Hearst and like northern Ontario where you're starting to get pretty out there, but you're still, nothing compares
Well, you don't
northern
have the
British
scale,
Columbia.
too.
No,
Like, you
yeah,
don't have
100%.
that, where you're 4,000 feet above a valley
Yeah.
and you're looking out and there's just nothing.
Yes.
Like, it's
yes.
just mountains as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
I think that's what you don't have, because Northern Ontario is quite, I mean, shit, if you were going to get lost somewhere,
Yep.
I'd get lost way faster out there than
I would too.
mountains.
I need mountains. Flats fuck me up.
Yeah.
As long as there's an up and a down and a left and a right, I'm good. Right. But you stick me in the flats, it's like compass is coming out, bro.
For sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of like, that's my background in a nutshell. At that point, I ended up moving out here when I was 23 with the goal to become a hunting guide.
Okay.
I literally knew nothing about it. Never met a hunting guide before in my life. I'd watched some shows on Wild.
Well, and you're
TV.
going into 8 seasons now, 2 wrangling, 6 guiding.
Yeah.
So that would have taken us to, it's 21 to 2013, like pretty nascent social media too. Like there's not a lot of information. Like these days, it's pretty easy to get information about that kind of stuff. And I'm assuming there wasn't a ton around when you first got out here.
Not like a ton, but I also didn't even really know where to start. I mean, I've been using Instagram, I think, since maybe 2009 or 10, like because of my photography background.
Right.
And that was originally, it was this idea that photographers are always sharing everyone's website and everyone's portfolio. And this is kind of funny. It's like so manicured. So this is this way that people can just share these sort of instant, like a snap it's not doctored. It's not like this grand, presentation of what one's life is, which is kind of ironic because now that's the exact opposite, right? And everything you look on there, you're like, it's not your day to day. Like,
no, it's perfectly manicured, filtered, curated. Exactly. Look at how great I am and how awesome my life is.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyways, and so that didn't really come about through that. I mean, I just cold called outfitters and emailed them for like a year. And it's like, I don't know, maybe I think in some ways it was like the fact that I was naive about it was really what helped me be successful in it.
I think that's a great insight, man. When you don't realize how ridiculous something that you're trying to do is, I think it helps you succeed sometimes.
Yeah. And it just was one of those things where it was like, well, I don't really know what else to do other than just cold call people and send them emails and be like, hey, I've never been on a horse or in the mountains. Can I work for you?
Yeah.
And so, that first year that I didn't get any traction there. And then I had met Adam through Instagram. We had never met up in person.
Okay.
But he was living in North Van at the time. I was on the island. And he had just started the Journal of Mountain Hunting. I think that was, like early 2014.
Okay.
Or mid 2014. But we'd had a bunch of back and forth, like, hey, we should try and get out bear hunting together, or, maybe I could come there, and all this back and forth. And anyways, I was in Vancouver. I was going to be in Vancouver for 2 weeks over Christmas because my sister lived there. And I flipped Yonki a message and said, like, hey man, if you want to meet up for a beer or whatever, I'll be around. And at the time I was doing masonry on the island, but I was able to hunt deer like really close, about 10 minutes away from the job site and 15 minutes away from my house. So I was out, most afternoons or mornings, like sometimes, my boss I'd kind of helped get him into hunting. So there was a lot of like, okay, well, it's, we're going to do like some stone work today, but it's going to be pissing rain until 10 a.m. Do you just want to go hunting first thing this morning for a couple hours? And then we'll go in and work and just make up the time on the back end. So I was probably hunting like 4 to 6 days a week at that point.
Okay.
And so Yonki and I met up for beers, and he was basically, we were just talking about this the other day. He's like, are you like a trust fund kid or some shit? Like, what do you do for work? And I was like, oh, I'm like, I do masonry and shit, but what I'm actually like working towards, I'm trying to become a wrangler. I'm just having a hard time kind of getting my foot in the door. And he, I just started the journal, and he's like, oh dude, you got to come down to the sheep show in Reno. And I didn't know anything about it, but he, sold me a good case, and I was like, look, dude, I'm like a 23-year-old. I'm fucking broke. I work enough to be able to go hunt and pay my bills, and there isn't really much left over. So I don't know if I can swing that. And he's like, well, if you can get down there and get registered, like you can stay in my hotel room for free. And I'm like, all right, well, that's kind of something. And anyway, so he kudos to him, man. Like he really pushed me at that. And I went down there and he kind of introduced me to everyone that he'd met through the early stages of the journal, reaching out to people in the industry. So there were some guides and some people that had done a lot of hunting and that had written articles and stuff. And we were able to meet, some of the people through in Sitka and stuff like that. And I was able to make some really good connections. And then that's how I ended up working for the outfitter I work for now. It was one of the booths I walked into.
So you work for the same outfitter you started working for. So I'm sure you've done some like side stuff, but you basically worked for one guy consistently throughout.
Yeah. My main season, like July through October, I've worked for the same outfitter. Yeah.
Okay.
Which it's been great. Like he's an awesome dude, great employer, pushes the guides really hard, but at the same time, like he always has our back and will go to bat for us. And it's been awesome. Yeah, it's been good. But that's basically how it started. And he kind of looked at me and, asked me a bit about myself and just said like, hey, are you willing to work really hard for not very much money? And I was like, fuck yeah, I am, dude. That's that's one thing I can do. Like, yeah, I don't know shit about anything else, but yeah. And that's sort of how that started. And man, it was such a,
and so for people who don't understand Western guiding, and I'm going to be even more specific and say like horse-centric guiding, which is what the majority of British Columbia's sheep guiding relies
Absolutely.
on. Not all of it, but the majority of it for sure.
Yeah.
Predominantly because we have to use fixed wing aircraft like the Yukon does it, and I think that gives them, or is the Yukon and the NWT?
Just the NWT.
Just the NWT. Yeah. So that kind of gives that there's a whole other kind of thing going on over there. But the fact that we have to use fixed wing aircraft, the fact that we don't have the friendliest of regions, like the Yukon has a lot more open areas to land.
Absolutely.
Kind of narrows you down. Like if you can't get there on a jet boat, you're kind of looking at getting in on horses. So the path to becoming a guide, the most common path to becoming a sheep guide in British Columbia, walk them through it because you're going to go through, like it's not even really an assistant guide. Like the first job isn't really even have anything to do with guiding.
No, for sure. And first year wranglers, that's how they start out. You're going to start out your first year. For the most part, you could take someone, someone who's really competent mountain hunter, maybe has a little bit of horse experience, and they might get plugged in to guide moose or goats or something like that right off the hop. But for the most part, like you get a lot of guys start when they're, 17, 18, like out of high school or early 20s. You're going to start out wrangling, and typically you'll wrangle for 2 to 3 years before you start actually guiding. And it's going to vary on people, how mature they are and everything like that. Because I think a common misconception is that like you have to be, the best quality in a guide is being an excellent hunter. And it's certainly a quality that's necessary. But I think it's probably not the most important. Like to be a good guide, I think, you just mostly have to be a people person. You have to be able to read people really well, and then sort of understand, I might get a guy who comes in, like, let's say I get a pastor who comes in with his wife on a moose hunt from Texas. It's like that. Those people are going to want an entirely different experience of their guide than if you come into my camp with a 40 of whiskey and say, listen, fucker, let's have a good time.
Yeah.
Let's hunt hard and we'll have some drinks at night. And that's a totally different, you have to be able to pivot how you hold conversations and, the kind of stuff you talk, how colorful your language is, all that kind of stuff. And then how you actually cater the hunt to the person's abilities too. So, I think, I don't know where I was going with that around wranglers, but first off, like you're going to start out as a wrangler, and really you're just a body. Like you're just an extra body at that. Like first year wranglers, I've come to realize this, and it's funny because, I remember sort of how the outfitter treated me, and he never treated me with any disrespect. But when I was a first year wrangler, it was kind of like, it's like, look, I'm not here to communicate stuff to you. I'm communicating stuff to the head guide or the head couple guides, right? And you're gonna like those guys can manage you.
Yes.
And I might give you a pointer here or there, but like I'm not here to be your buddy.
Yep.
I'm not here to kind of hold your hand or whatever else. And so looking back on it now, I can see it's like, all right, well, there's such low expectation to some degree because very few wranglers, like really, very few of them come back. Like, I don't know what it would be, maybe 15% of wranglers come back their second year. And it's hard work, man. Like it's, you know, the average wrangler's probably making like $1.25 a day. If you're totally green, you're making $1.25 a day. You're waking up at 5 a.m. before you get a coffee or take a shit or eat any food, you're getting up regardless of the weather and you're going to find horses in the mountains. And it can be a very jarring experience for people, I think. So yeah, it's really not glorious at all, but it's really integral to a horseback operation. Having someone to do that, like frees up the guide to be able to really just focus on the hunt itself. And that's something that the first guide that I ever worked for was still a guide that I guide with today. But he was really great in always kind of making me feel like what I was doing was important. Even if that was like, you know, we'd ride up into a high mountain pass and then he'd be like, hey, look, dude, we got to go, but we just saw some rams and they're heading away from us. We're going to have to go backpack for 5 days. You're going to sit here in this meadow with the horses for 5 days and just shepherd them, basically make sure they don't take off. You know, and it's like, that's tough sometimes for a young wrangler to sit there and be like, okay, well, what do I have? Like 24 hours a day is a long time when all you're doing is basically sitting in a camp. And on top of that, when you don't have like a great depth of experience in the mountains and you're like, okay, well, there's grizzly bears and wolves and wolverines. And what happens if the horses take off on me? And you hear these nightmare stories about, you know, the horses go 15 kilometers back to the last camp and I have to just go walk there. Like river crossings and all, and then bring them back all the way up here. So there's all that, but he always did a great job at saying like, look, we can't go off and kill a ram backpacking if we don't have someone to take care of the horses. So you're like, you know, you are just as important as me in making in success for the client. And I think that was really helpful for me. And that's something that I've always tried to carry forward with my wranglers, but that's kind of like I don't even know if I really touched on that, but generally you're going to wrangle for like 3 years. So you're basically, you know, later on in that, you're becoming more of an assistant guide, and your guide's going to have the guides you're working for. Hopefully, if they also understand what it means to be a good mentor, you know, they're going to walk you through their decision-making on a stock. They're going to ask you questions like you get in, you start looking at sheep, or maybe even you're a really long ways off and you're looking at goats, and they're going to start asking you like, okay, well, you know, tell me about what you're seeing in your spotting scope. Do you think it's a billy? Do you think it's a good billy? Do you think it's mature? Why do you think that? Okay. And so maybe I agree that it is. I would then say like, okay, so how would you tackle this? Do we just go, you know, burn leather this afternoon and try and get up there? Do we go the next day and make a couple days of it? Would you go up this way? Would you go up that route? Like trying to get them to think, you know, to break up that cycle of just listening to the guide and think critically for themselves on how you would actually tackle that terrain and sort of manage things within the hunt, depending on who your client is and all that.
Yeah. And then, so when you transition, because this is the other thing that it was funny. I heard, so my buddy Spencer, he just got into wrangling and he's done 1 year and he's totally going back for a second year. He couldn't be more excited. And one of the guides gave him a good piece of advice too. He's like, don't be in such a rush to be a guide right away, because the whole thing kind of changes and there's a whole different set of pressures on you. And in some ways, if there's aspects of the wrangling that you don't mind and you like, and it's not like a job that you hate, it's not also a bad idea to stick it out for a couple of years there, because then when you do make the transition, you're going to have been around more guides. You're going to be a little bit more skilled. You're going to have more experience under your belt. And his general impression coming back was that most guys are trying to get through that as quickly as possible. And that a better perspective is that might not be the best way to approach it.
Yeah, I would generally agree, but I think it's also one of those things. It's like, it makes sense why their mentality is there, right? I mean, you're generally talking about like 18 to 23-year-old men.
Sure.
You got a lot of like hormones and testosterone,
Yeah.
a lot of trying to be like, hey, I want that. Like, I want the glory. I want the picture. I want the handshake from the client. I want the huge sheep
The
tip.
big tip. Yep.
And hey, like, trust me, it's great. But you also like, yeah, you do want that. It is important to see that curve. And I think for myself, like, that was maybe a bit, I actually did battle with that a little bit because I was supposed to guide. I was told I was going to be guiding a sheep hunt like a year before I actually did.
Okay.
And that was a tough pill to swallow, right? That it was like, okay, well then.
So you went up there thinking you were going to get your own hunt and you didn't.
Yeah. I thought I was going to get a sheep hunt. Like at that point I was already guiding. I think my second year in the Yukon, I guided a moose hunt and then a caribou hunt right at the end of the season.
Okay.
And then after that, I was, I knew I had a season of guiding like goats, moose, caribou, that kind of stuff. But I was supposed to have one sheep hunt. And the way it worked out is I was packing for another guide, I think. And then the other client, the other guide, his client killed early, and then the next client flew in, and it was two clients that came in, and I was supposed to guide one, and I was already on another hunt, and but yeah, that was like definitely an ego check for me. It was one of those things. It's like, well, I feel like I'm ready. You want the money and all that kind of stuff, but I think it is important in those moments to sort of like take a step back and just be like, look, the whole world doesn't revolve around me. And I can either have, there's two ways that I can approach a situation. I can either be upset that it's not going the way I want it to go, or I can choose to frame that into a positive and look at it from like, okay, well, what can I take away from this? What can I learn from this, experience that I wasn't expecting to have? But I think there's always going to be lessons, there's always going to be some lessons, something you can pick up working with. Doesn't matter who it is. And another guide that I worked for actually had he had some great advice around that. And he told me, I think it was my second year wrangling, and he told me like, before you know it, dude, you're going to be guiding sheep and blah, blah, blah. And just one thing I want you to remember is that it doesn't matter if it's a first year wrangler or a client who's got 4 slams under his name. There's always going to be something you can learn from someone out here. And it doesn't matter if that's just a different way to, tie a knot or like rig up a horse or troubleshoot something, or it's an entire or if it's a huge lesson around maybe something aging sheep or their habits or whatever else. So I think that was like really, I did hold on to that. And I think that was helpful and made things a little easier. But for sure, I think it's tough, right? It's like, yeah, you get young guys and they want that glory, but I think it's also nice wrangling too, because you don't have pressure. You got the pressure to go, like, don't get me wrong. It's a really tough job. And if those horses take off, like if my wrangler comes into camp 2 hours after he left to go get the horses and tells me he can't find the horses, I'm going to tell him to go back out and find them. Yeah. And don't come take some food or whatever, but that's your job, man. Like that's your only job. So you don't come back if you can't. If they went 17 kilometers, send me an inReach and, we'll go hiking for the day, but that's your gig. And, and there's all of these ways that you can manage them to kind of try and avoid that. And just like anything in life, right? There's usually signs leading up before the major catastrophe happens with them. But I think that's really good advice for guys. Like if they, if they're willing to be patient, then you've always got a lot of shit you can learn, and you can learn a lot better when there isn't 80K of pressure sitting over top of your head.
I remember one of the, it's a long story and I won't get into it all, but there was this one point in my life I was living in the bush with this super old dude, and he was like 75 years old, and he had 9 certified trades. And we were building like a little like screened in porch off of his, the back of his house. And he went to go use the skill saw for something. And I was like trying to help him out. And this was before a lot of like my real working career. Like you have boy jobs and then you graduate one day and all of a sudden you have man jobs, right? Like you go from being a deli clerk in a grocery store to being like a framer on a house. And these are like 2 totally different worlds where you get, people are nice to you in the grocery store. People tell you you're a fucking asshole and and you like get treated very differently and you become a man in this other world. And this was kind of just before all that stuff for me. And I remember he picked up the skill saw and he went to go cut something with it. And he goes, "Why is there no power to the skill saw?" And he goes, and I said, I don't know, man, you didn't tell me to plug it in. And he goes, your job as the apprentice is to be looking around your circumstances at all times and predicting what your journeyman is going to need before he knows he needs it. It's like, it's not rocket science to know that, this piece of lumber was going to have to get cut in half because we're about to go put this arch in or whatever the situation was. And you could have deduced pretty quickly that this fucking thing needed to be plugged in. And like, that was probably the single most valuable lesson like I ever had in my working career, because I never forgot that. And every single job that I took, I was the guy with the initiative. Like, I was looking around like, what needs to be done next? Like, what's the bottleneck going to be 2, 3, 4 steps from now that we need to fix, or what needs to be done? And that is when you finally get to the point in your life when you're hiring people and people are working for you, and you're just dying, like, somebody please show me that ability to like look at things holistically and problem solve without me. Like, you don't get paid for, and that's what people need to learn. Like, you don't get paid. Well, you can get paid to be told what to do, but you're going to make very little money and you're going to get treated like shit. But when you start becoming that person who is able to be like forward thinking and show initiative and problem solve before, being told what to do, like, that's such a watershed moment. And I would think that, being around those types of dudes in those types of circumstances, there would be a lot of opportunities, both positively and negatively, to learn similar lessons.
Absolutely. And that was a big thing for me going into, like, I was aware of my lack of aptitude. Like, I had no fucking clue what I was doing.
Right.
But I've also, like, I had a lot of experience working in sort of trades and stuff like that, being outside. And I knew one thing. I was like, nobody else is going to outwork me. Right. I have that ability to always be asking questions, to always be looking for the next step. And I had experience before running a landscaping crew and stuff like that. So it wasn't like, it's not the same as maybe some of the guys that come in and they're 18 years old. They literally just graduated high school. They've worked, like you said, something like a deli clerk job. Yeah. And they've just been told like, hey, your job is to pull when the oven goes ding, you pull the bread out of the oven, cut it, and put it in the cooling rack. Yeah. And that's all you do, or you just stock shelves all day or something. Like, so I had experience with all that troubleshooting and stuff like that. But yeah, that was for sure. That was it. I mean, that's the one thing. And I had a conversation with one of my wranglers about that this year, because there was a point where I was packing horses and he was kind of standing around waiting for the next. And I was like, hey man, you know, especially on a moving day, you should never be standing around watching the guide. There's always something, whether it's like, make sure go around, make sure all the rigging is tight on the horses again, or whatever it is. Right. And I think the client at the time too said this guy was a welder. He'd owned his own shop in Saskatchewan, younger guy, late 30s or something. And he's like, that's actually just a great life lesson to like hold on to with everything you do. Yeah. And it's true, right? Like, it's like, if you can always be looking ahead at what you need to be done, it's like, it's job security. It's the best job 100%. Security you can have is really just, but it's also something I wonder too. It's like, well, how do you teach that to people? Like, how do you teach that drive? How do you teach the initiative? It's
his nature nurture, man. And I think some of it is teachable and some of it isn't. I think you can hone it, but I also think it's one of those things, if that spark isn't there, I don't think it's something you can give to people. I think if people have that, thirst to learn, and I ran engineering crews for 15 years in BC, and I probably went through 150 junior compassmen in that time. And like, you get to a point where you just, within the first week, you just know, like, this is somebody I'm going to put energy into, or this is somebody I'm not. And you don't have to be the smartest guy. I don't even care if you know how to do the job. Like, it's funny. I work with big corporations now, and we talk about like hiring, and I'm on a couple of like entrepreneur organizations. And like, the message that I've been getting lately is that you hire for culture and fit. Most people don't give a shit if you actually know how to do the job. Like, the technical part of something is actually so much easier to train than the drive and that culture fit and the ability to mold into the organization. And it's like, I'm sure you guys see the same thing. Like, the personality is almost more important than anything else, especially in your situation. Like, because you're going to be in such stressful circumstances and you're going to be trusting your life to these other people that you're out there with. And if you can do that, then making sure the guy knows the right knots for the right rigging, or if he sets something up wrong a couple times, like that's easy shit to fix. I think that other shit is bigger and tougher.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can teach people how to age sheep.
Yeah.
You can't, it's hard to teach them, not to be lazy, not to opt to take the easiest route out and all that kind of stuff. So
100%. So what is, I feel like you've done this admirable job of like setting out all these goals, coming out here, drive, discipline, commitment, achieving these goals. So like, what gets you out of bed now? Having, done 8 seasons, 6 as a guide, what's this next year? Like, what are your own goals? Are they starting to become more personal goals, more business goals? Are they still related to guiding, but they manifest themselves differently now? Like, what is it for you that is driving you moving forward?
I think it's kind of a mix. I mean, like, I'm maybe not obviously, but like I'm in my 30s now. We'll be getting married in June.
Congratulations,
man.
Man.
Thanks.
Big step.
Yeah. Excited about that. And we've been together for almost, not actually almost a decade, but 3/4. And that's all been great. And so I have some personal goals, obviously, as far as like, that and moving forward and having a family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
As far as on the hunting side of things, I think the biggest things that I think hunting and ski touring sort of both fill a need in my life, a very similar one. And that's like in part being in those places. And then also, I'm sure pushing yourself and all of that kind of stuff. I've never really been, Yonki and I are very different in that way. And I would assume I'm probably very different than you in that way. I've never been a super competitive person. I've been competitive with myself in all of the, in all the sports and stuff I did. I never thrived in team sports environments, but individual stuff I preferred. And it was always kind of that internal battle to push myself. And I think that's still, I think in a lot of ways, like I'm, whatever you want to call it, blessed or just fortunate that it's like, that's just in me. The drive for myself to want to still be out there is not something I struggle with. Like it's not even a second question. There's nothing for me. There's never been anything that feels like that for me.
Right.
So like guiding, being able to make money, to be able to support myself in doing something that I love that much that I legitimately forget that I'm working for 2 weeks at a time, or 10 days. And you'll like kind of have this like aha moment, like shit, I'm making money right now. And it's actually pretty decent money. Yeah. So for that, like, that's kind of easy. Like, it's just, for the most part, I obviously go through periods in the year where I'm kind of like, all right, I'm, time to unplug and not really focus on hunting. But for the most part, it's just really driven. And the more I can learn, like that's it. I think it's like anything, right? It's the more you learn about it, the more you realize that like you start to see your gaps of knowledge.
Right.
And even as I go on and on and on, and I'm so much more experienced now, my decision making as a guide and a hunter is so much better than it was, but that's also opened my eyes to all of the stuff that I don't know. And I think that's like, I think hunting is like this great sort of metaphor for life in some ways, where it's so much of it, so many lessons that you have there, you can pull across into your day-to-day life, be it your relationships, your career, whatever. And there's so many teachable moments there. But I think for me, it's like, it's always, there's just so many questions that you'll never answer. But being able to continue to push, continue to learn, for me, that's I really enjoy that with hunting. And then also just like kind of being in community, having that community, going on different hunts, seeing some of my buddies succeed, seeing some like, and I really enjoy hunting with guys that are like, as competent as me in the mountains. And I also enjoy hunting with people that have a very low level of competency in the mountains and seeing them succeed and maybe, shoot a bear or a deer or something like that. I mean, I think it's always super gratifying to be able to share those experiences.
Yeah, man. I feel like that's an area I want to start working on. I tend to do things solo, and I think I had a little bit of fellowship this year, and I got out for some hunts with some dudes, and I really liked that. And I think also, giving back and maybe helping some other people get out is something I want to focus on in the coming years as well. So one topic I wanted to talk about, because both of us are content creators, for lack of a better term, and both of us host podcasts. And I sent you this email that a gentleman named Fred wrote in, and just to give some context. So my buddy Bob comes on the podcast last 2 weeks ago and shares a story about a goat hunt. And while sharing the story of the goat hunt, notes the unit number of where the goat hunt was. It is an LEH tag, and it is a pretty 1-to-1. So let's say it is not a widely sought after tag. I'm not going to comment on the quality of the tag because personally I know nothing about this unit, but I do think it is safe to say that there are some tags in British Columbia that just because the odds are pretty decent doesn't mean they're not actually really good tags. It just means everybody hasn't gotten onto the fact that those are particularly decent tags. So Fred writes in this email, super thoughtful, really nice email. It wasn't overly negative at all. It was a great email. And basically very politely asks me to beep out unit numbers moving forward. And I think even noted that Bob probably hadn't done this on purpose, and it wasn't, and it got me thinking that, okay, so first let's talk about the kind of the cut and dry issue at hand, because it does affect, we'd be an idiot if we didn't think it, it doesn't take that many people applying for a unit to. Now, the funny thing is he didn't actually see any goats, so that I couldn't help, but I did want to say that in reply. I'm like, you might want this guy to tell people where he went, because the fact that he didn't see anything, people are not going to be falling all over themselves. But it's also his first goat hunt, so it's not really, a great illustration of what could be possible within that unit. But I forwarded the email to you, and I kind of said, hey, let's have a little chat about this. So just as a broad topic, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, we do everything we can to try and remove locations. There's been lots of, podcast notes. So Mike Peterson from the Rookie Hunters, he does all of our podcast editing and stuff like that. And so anytime we have something, sometimes I might lose my train of thought, or you get a dog barking in the background from a guest or whatever it might be. There's always little glitches and stuff. And I would say ours are usually, especially now, it's usually more of a free roll. More often than not, I might say, hey, the ending was a little weird. Can you cut? We did a double take or something, or outroing someone. But yeah, for sure. I always mark down if someone gives too specific of a landmark, I'll always mark that down, the timestamp, and remove that. I think, it's interesting because I have buddies who are newer hunters in BC and have since I was a newer hunter in BC. And I think there's always been this perception that's that gatekeeping, right?
Right.
And that oh, well, you guys know all the stuff and someone else told you, so why can't you tell me? And I think he mentioned this actually in the email. There's a difference, for a one-to-one exchange. Yeah. I mean, before, I don't know that I can't remember if I told you any specifics, but before your first goat hunt or winter goat hunt, we talked on the phone, and,
we did.
I'm always happy to share. In cases like that, especially on a hunt like that, I've told people exactly where I've killed goats before, because at the end of the day, if you're going to drive all the way up there and you're going to actually bust your ass to get in there and do the work to get up to where the goats are and all that kind of stuff, hey, that's most people won't do that. So I don't have a problem sharing that. But I think, and this is something that I've kind of battled a lot with through the progress of our films over the years, is it's so easy to pick out where people are hunting. especially.
Well, let's take that goat hunt as a great example too, because there's no way to hide where you are, because if you are up there during a certain time of year and you don't have an LEH tag, there's really only one place where you could be. I mean, there's a couple places within that one place, but there's only one open area. So, I mean, that was one of the things I thought of when he sent it, because I think I agree with him 100% in principle. I think my only retort is, in order to put out content, I think we are implicitly accepting a little bit of collateral damage.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like that's the part that I struggle a lot with, and it depends on what the situation is. Like,
yes,
in the case of our winter goat film, everyone who's seen it and done their research can find out exactly where we are.
Yes.
But what we tried not to do was showcase where we were. We didn't talk about, whether or not that was an LEH. We didn't talk about where the closest towns were. We tried not to film too much around there. And, you try and kind of pull those sections out. And then the people who are going to do the homework are going to do the homework. Like, I'm competent enough at this point in Google Earth sleuthing that I've had buddies in Alaska send me a picture of a sheep that was killed in an area I've never even looked at. And two glasses of whiskey and 2 hours later, I found the peak. Right. Based off a little like alpine tarn that's 200 yards long or something like that. So it's like, you are right. There is going to be some level of collateral. What I always think is, like, especially with something like goats, what potential negative impact could I be having on that species? And with goats, it's like, I think there's a higher percentage of people who end up killing nannies because they've experienced such a difficult hunt, right? That they're then like, well, I'm here,
I'm taking something home,
and they're not 100% sure,
right?
But it's like they've put so much into it, and often goat hunting is going to be like some of the hardest hunts you ever do, especially that time of year. Yeah. So it would be hard for me. Given my background in guiding, and then, my feelings around conservation and stuff, and my support of conservation, it would be difficult for me if I found out that, say, one of those areas closed for general open season because there was an increase in nanny harvest, and it was due to, more exposure, and people who maybe didn't have all of those, all of the experience to walk away from a goat, have now been thrust into it, through all of this, the internet e-scouting and all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely something I always battle with. I think we just try and err on the side of caution and remove all locations. And when you're filming, like, you try, but I mean, shit, 100%. It's not. It's like with mountain peaks, especially, like, you film a peak, and if there's a river in it or a body of water, like, everyone knows where it is. So,
and I have another point I want to make, but I want to close this one first. So I think for me, it was a learning lesson, because I do remember he said the unit number, and I remember thinking to myself, ooh, that's weird. Like, I'd say a region, like I was in region 8, like I went whitetail hunting in region 8. I think that's an acceptable, for sure. That gives you a rough idea of where I was in the province. I think that's a totally acceptable thing to say. Or I was sheep hunting in region 7. That's totally acceptable to say. But when he did say the specific unit number, I did think to myself, I'm like, oh, that's a little bit sensitive. And especially because it wasn't an LEH tag. And I think this is an important conversation to have, because, and Bob knows what he's doing. He's not like one of these guys who's like brand new to hunting anything. So I don't want to say that he is, but we've all had those conversations when guys come right out and say, can I have a spot, or where'd you go hunting? And everybody, you have to have like one of those teachable moments when you're like, that's actually a really unacceptable. It's like asking what color panties your wife is wearing.
For sure.
Like, this is not a question you ask. Like, and it's okay that you don't know that's a question you ask. I think we also need to say that's not information you share.
Yes.
Because maybe you're okay giving that up. And this was Fred's point, and I think it's a point well taken. And I need to, I failed a little bit my audience, because I didn't, and this is a good learning lesson for me, is he's like, well, maybe I've worked really hard at finding that. And now because somebody else had a slip up on your show, maybe that attracts more attention or whatever the case may be. And I think he has a valid point. And I think you can talk about a hunt, and I think you can share lessons about a hunt that don't require that level of specificity. Like, I think it's different when you start to lose. Like, if I blur out everything in the background of a sheep hunt, it's like, what the I don't even want to watch this anymore.
For sure.
So I think you have to maintain the integrity of the storytelling. But I think when you can protect the collateral damage and it doesn't impact, like your towing the line is a very great example. It didn't matter where the fuck that was. That could have been 200 more kilometers north. It could have been in Alaska. It could have been in NWT. Like, it didn't matter for that story to be told the way it was. We didn't need to know exactly where it was. And you guys were still able to communicate the same emotions and the same narrative and the same lessons without getting hyper specific and by excluding, certain elements that would have, been a little bit more. And I almost feel like for those dudes that do the digging, it's like, well, okay, you get it now because you did the extra effort. You know what I mean? And I think that's what Fred was saying in his email too. Like, for the guys who are poring over the draw odds and poring over Google Earth and looking for these little inconsistencies when an area that has higher harvest statistics but still has better odds, and finding that for the dudes who are doing that work, they deserve to get that little edge, and then to just kind of, blow up their spot like that. And not like he even did on this particular one. I don't think it's a particularly well sought after unit, but I think he had a valid point. I do agree with him.
Yeah, for sure. I also think it is one of those things that when it comes to, maybe this is just a side note, but that when it comes to like low areas that have a really good draw odds and then a high number of tags, right? Which I'm just gonna guess that's kind of where this falls under, but a low success rate. Yeah. What that usually tells me is it's probably nasty as fuck to get into.
Yeah.
There's probably a decent population of animals, but it's still because of the terrain, whether it's terrain or, weather or something during that given time. There's a reason that they're giving out so many, and it's so easy. And it's usually you're going to see that kind of attrition of people you'll see a spike in the odds. Like maybe from your podcast, like next year, those odds are going to be 5-1 odds.
Right.
And then the next year they're going to be 2-1 odds. And then they're going to be back to 1-1 odds because all the people who were like, hey, sweet and easy X hunt, they go in there, get their ass handed to them. And they're like, oh, okay, well, they, cruise back out. And then it's kind of the same rotation of guys that do it. But yeah, I think like for me, it's like for any content that we put out, that's sort of front of my mind is less so, am I burning other hunters? Although that's an interesting perspective that I quite frankly hadn't thought of before you forwarded me that email, but more so, am I burning those animals themselves? Like I don't ever want to have, in the same way that you or I wouldn't go out and just gut shoot a deer and be like, well, I didn't hit that one, didn't find it, so I'm just going to go shoot another. Like you're trying to minimize your negative impact on the wildlife. For me, I look at it kind of in the same vein. So
the other point that you brought up that I think bears repeating is this, like, there's barriers to entry for a reason. Like, again, let's take our goat hunt. You want somebody to have a certain level of experience and drive in order to get up there. And I think if you made it too easy, like I've had dudes email me and want more information, and I'm kind of not withholding, but it's like I don't give it out real easily because it's like, I don't know, I catch this like, I'm like, how serious are you really? Like, and I don't want to send you to a place like that. If you're able to figure things out without being spoon-fed, then that probably also means that you're hard enough to get in there and out and be okay. And so I do think some of those barriers, it's not that we're trying to withhold information to rob success from the up and coming generation. And I've given this example on my podcast so many times, people are probably sick of hearing it. But a lot of the times, the old guys want to watch you fail first. because that proves to them your level of commitment. Like the number of emails I've gotten after a failed hunt film has gone up from like legit dudes who have zero social media presence and don't give a fuck about fuck, but like are like hardcore 20, 30, 40-year vet BC hunters who are like, listen, next time you're going up there, shoot me an email or whatever. After they watch me go in there and get the shit kicked out of myself, and I didn't ask anybody for help, and I just went and bashed my head against a brick wall for 10 days trying to figure it out by myself. After doing that, the amount of help you get, it changes dramatically. And I do think that the focus tends to be on like, help me first so I can go be successful. And I always try and say, just go fail. There's nothing wrong with that. When you come back from failing, people are going to be way more open and eager to help you out because you've proven you're willing to do the work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think and I want to make one exception to this because I know some people are going to watch some of my hunt films and they're going to call me out on this, and I want to get out ahead of it. So when I took my archery bull in New Mexico, I got a draw tag in Unit 36. And it's like a premium for anybody who understands how the draw odds work. And this would be like getting the fucking Kamloops sheep tag. Maybe not quite that good, but I mean, it is, I think there were 11 non-resident tags given out the year that I got mine. Like the odds are astronomical. It's the type of thing you are only ever going to pull once in your life. And when I put up my film, I put the unit number in the film. For starters, because anybody who watched the film and is from New Mexico, you're gonna see certain landmarks and you're gonna kind of know where I was anyways. And also, when I posted that I drew that tag, and this is a weird thing, there's a big difference between British Columbia and the States in the perception of premium units. If somebody, because you're normally only ever going to draw these premium units once because you've had to build points. New Mexico is an exception because it's a pure lottery state. But when you pull a pure premium unit, you will have other dudes come out of the woodwork who've got that one before, mostly because they know they're never going to go back in there again, and you can't blow up the spot. Yeah. Because you can't, it's such a hard thing. There's only 10 dudes a year going in there anyways.
The entirety of the US putting in for it.
You couldn't make it any worse. Like everyone knows this is a killer unit. And so I got so much help from complete strangers that resulted in me having a phenomenal hunt. When I put my hunt film up, I put the unit number right in the thing. And I get very little, one or two people, and it's been up there for like 4 years, 3 years, and only one or two people have ever said, and it's different because I've put general hunts up and people are like, asshole, I know where you are in Montana. And I'm like, it's a shitty fucking over-the-counter unit. Who cares? But because it's their backyard honey hole, they don't want that up there. But no one has flamed me for this Unit 36. And I know when the Mexico draw comes out, because every single year I get 3 to 5 emails in the same day. And it's always, bro, I just pulled Unit 36. Can I ask you a couple questions? And normally they're not asking for locations and stuff. And I tell the same thing to everybody every year. Here's my phone number. Call me. And the first thing I say is like, listen, I'm going to have 3 or 4 phone calls this year. And I'm going to tell everybody the same thing. I'm going to tell you where I got my bull, and I'm going to tell you where I camped, and I'm going to tell you the experience that I had, because it was a phenomenal experience. And I don't think anybody is hunting this unit the way I hunted in it. Like most of them are road hunting and day hunting. And I went into the backcountry and I had this crazy 5 days and it was amazing. And the amount of times I've got that text back, like mid-September with somebody's downed bull being like, had the hunt of a lifetime, can't thank you enough. And it's like, so I just wanted to say, like, I think there are rare exceptions when you know that it is okay to share information and you're not going to blow up a spot. But I think those require some experience and some nuance to like flesh out. And I think your earlier statement that it's better to err on the side of caution and share less information than more is probably the better like overall strategy, except for a few rare exceptions.
Yeah, for sure. There's always, there's always going to be those things that fall outside of the spectrum. And I think, you did hit the nail on the head when you said the States has just a different system
Yeah.
than us. Like,
But it's like a Stave Lake elk tag. If you pull that Stave Lake elk tag and you go on Hunting BC, somebody's going to DM you and tell you where to go, because there's only 2 of them a year. And if you're not the tag holder, why wouldn't you? That would be an example of where somebody is going to give you some insider information, because
Absolutely.
people just want to see somebody go in there and have a good hunt, because it's like there's only 2 of them and it ain't the rest of us. And again, like you mentioned, you couldn't make that any more popular of a draw. Like
Absolutely.
no more people are going to put in for that unit than are currently already putting in for it.
Yeah. 100%. And I think, like, when it comes to other premium units, I think people in BC, like, there isn't the same media around it, whether that's stuff like Mossback Guides or Go Hunt or any of those kind of hunting fool. There isn't, we don't have that in BC. And then on top of that, I think those like premium areas, a lot of times people kind of keep that as close to their chest as possible. So, there's certain zones where I know if I wanted to go and try and kill a winter goat for myself, and my only consideration was trying to maximize score, there's be a couple different zones I'd be looking at. And there's not going to be anywhere that's published. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe it is somewhere, but for the most part, that stuff's going to be kept a little bit tighter and quieter. And, I think
100%.
Lots of times it maybe doesn't matter that much. The guys, there's only going to be a certain percentage of people killing anyways. So
I also think people underestimate how hard hunting in British Columbia is. Like, I've hunted all over North America, and I still say it's the hardest place I've ever hunted. I think we have the greatest opportunity in all of North America, but I don't think we have the greatest target environment in all of North America. I think we have like really low density of animals for the most part compared to other. And I think that has to do with our terrain. I could make some comments about our wildlife management that, in my own personal opinions, I think we could be doing certain things differently, but again, I'm not in charge, so I'm not going to shit talk anybody. But I think that's another reason why you see this. I don't even know what to call it, but it's a tough crowd in BC, man. I've hunted a lot of places, and it's not like this, not as much like this, anyways, as you go other people. Like, it's very cliquey in BC, and I get what the new guys are. You know what I mean? I understand their frustrations, because it does feel like there's this kind of like insider outsider mentality. But I think a lot of that is because it's fucking hard, man. Like, these guys who take an elk every single year, it's because they've been doing that for like generations, or they failed 15 years first before they finally figured things out, where it's not like, and I've gone hunting elk in Montana and Wyoming, and like, you don't have to be a fucking rocket scientist to go down there and get an elk. Like, I'll say it is not the same. John Barklow would call it varsity level archery hunting. Like, it's not varsity level down there. It's just not. Yeah. This is a totally different game. And I'm sure there's areas that do have higher densities where people do have easier hunts. But for us mountain guys who like to kind of get in the steep and deep, like, I think British Columbia is one of the hardest places in the world to hunt, like, writ large.
I would agree. I haven't hunted all over everywhere, but obviously my clients have and are from a wide spectrum of places. And certainly that's something that they're often amazed at, is how big and how difficult BC is to hunt. Man, I've been on 7 elk hunts in British Columbia, and I've still never taken an elk. I've never really gotten close. And I've gone to like Haida Gwaii for 3 years. I've gone up in 7 for 2 years. I've gone a bunch of different places, and it's just like, it's this nut that I just can't seem to crack. And I'm willing to own that as well. You know what I mean? Like, I think I was talking to a buddy on the phone this year, and he's like, "You're not scouting, man." And he goes, "Those guys who are taking one every year," and he's one of them. He's like, "A lot of them are going on like a family trip for a couple weeks in July and August, and they're taking up the travel trailer, and they're setting it up on a lake, and they're bringing the quad, and they're scouting for a few weeks in the summer, and they're getting their game plan sorted out." And it's like,
you may only see the guy go up and be successful for 7-8 days in September, but a lot of these like homegrown guys who are successful every year, same as the sheep guys, you know what I mean? Like they're going in on scouting trips in the summer or in the spring before they go in, or they've been going into the same area for 10 or 15 years. Like I think it looks like people go in and are successful in this like snapshot in time. But the thing I have to remind myself of in BC is that most of these guys who are repetitively, because that's what I'm interested in. I don't care about the one guy who got one crazy animal. The people I'm impressed with are the people who are successful year after year in BC. Like those are the guys that I really look up to. And I think those guys, for the most part, are doing a lot of out of season legwork.
Yeah, I think so. It's something I always tell my buddies is like, you know, you need time in the field. Yeah. Right. And whether that's time in the field, if you've got, you know, a demanding job and you can only take 7 days in the hunting season and then, you know, have some weekends on the either end, then it's like you need to find time. You need to find ways to put that time in other places. And it's tough, certainly for stone sheep. Like that's one of the toughest things.
Well, and that's lower mainland guys, right? Because you're driving to Hell's Half Acre and back, like, and you're fighting guys who live in Fort Nelson and Fort St. John. And it's like, those guys can go out on the weekends to go scouting and stuff. Yeah, and it's just like
in the jet boat.
Shit just ain't fair, man. That's just, it's the way the cookie crumbles. Yeah. But it definitely plays into it. And you can't help but be, it is definitely, there are some frustrations to be had. Anyways, I
also think it's one of those things too, like sometimes I think people's expectation,
right.
You know, whether that's because of, you know, what they see on Instagram or even watching films where, especially if people are only putting out films that are successful. Yeah. Like I think that's one of the things that, Rinella has always done really well is
I appreciate that.
He'll fucking show everything.
Yeah.
Like he'll show himself, you know, making some bumbling idiot mistake, and he'll show himself killing some wicked animal. And it's not that perception that everything's perfect. Which is good. It's an honest representation of hunting. It's good for hunters to see. It's good for non-hunters to see. But I think sometimes people can have those expectations. And what I often think of it or say to people is like, look, if you're booking a stone sheep hunt, you know, in our case, like we book 14-day stone sheep hunts. So 14 days of hunting for a guided hunt with the outfit that I work at. Now those are professional guides who've spent a bunch of time, you know, through their years wrangling, a bunch of time stone sheep hunting and then guiding as well. Some of the guys have 3 decades of experience. You have horses, you have knowledge of the area, you have boat and or plane access. You know, you have all of these things working in your favor, and the outfitter still thinks that 14 days is the best amount of time for us to maximize our success rate. And we're still not 100% on success. Yeah. So when I look at that, it's like, all right, well, yeah, of course. Like if you only go in for 10, and I realize not everyone can just take 17 days away from home and work and all those kinds of things. But if you go in for 10 and it's your second time hunting stone sheep, you shouldn't have the expectation that you're going to come out of there successful when the professionals feel they need 14. Yeah. So I think a lot of times it's like going into things with like managing your expectations. And, but I think it's also one of those things that like, that's probably a positive that podcasts and other content can have, is because you can have those conversations, right? You can have conversations like this. And if that changes, you know, some young guy or girl listening to this and they're like, hey, okay, like I do want to go stone sheep hunting this year. And maybe my focus won't just be on like getting a ram so I can have that picture or hang the mount on my wall. But just to get out there and learn and experience it and see sheep and start to study their habits and try and get comfortable with aging and take pictures and bring them back and have conversations. Like, I think that's the kind of good you can do in these platforms. And even make it the whole trip. Like the amount of dudes I saw coming out early, and I'm going to say it, and I'm sure I'll piss some people off, but the number of bullshit excuses that I was like, fucking come on, man. Like, you waited all year for this trip and you got guys coming out after 5 or 6 days citing this and that and this. And it's like, I think the true, you know what I mean? Like, go in there for 12 or 14,
sit in there for 12 or 14.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish there was more emphasis put on, because I think what happens is nobody understands what that mental challenge actually looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they get in there and they are confronted by that, that's when the brain kind of starts fucking you over and coming up with all these really good, seemingly rational explanations for why you need to leave. Yeah, my leg, my foot's sore. Oh, we're getting a little low on food, or oh, we're not really seeing the animals. And I just like, my biggest push to people is just like, just stop, just don't give up. Like stay in there for the amount of time, because that's a win that you will take that no one can take away. I've got more respect for the dudes that go in there and stay their whole trip and come out empty-handed, but at least you made it. Like that in a lot of ways is the most difficult part about it. Luck has a lot to play with the rest, with the actual success part of it. And I wish there was more. I wish we could, I kind of came to this crossroads with my filmmaking about 2 years ago when I realized I was never going to be a body stacker. And like the bottom line is the only way you're going to rack up insane amounts of views on YouTube is by like big giant horns. And most of the guys who are doing that are like 80% guided hunts or private land, and they're just stacking bodies. And I was like, okay, with what I do for a living and how often I can get away, like I'm never going to be that guy. But I live in a province that basically has an infinite amount of unbelievably difficult hunts to do. Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to do, and I remember, I'm sure I talked about this to you because you were the first guy I phoned when I was going to do my goat hunt last year. And that was one of the initial drives for this goat hunt, is that like, if I can't guarantee stacking a body, what I can guarantee is like an extremely physically grueling, mentally challenging hunt. And I think that's interesting for people to watch. Because what I found out was people like kind of watched me kicking the shit out of myself. And then even if I came back empty-handed, I was still getting like really positive feedback and great engagement, and people liked watching it. And so I would like to see more emphasis put on that part of the hunt, because I do think it's more indicative of the actual struggle you went through anyways. The guy who comes home with the big rack didn't necessarily work any harder than the guy who didn't. You know what I mean? In fact, probably didn't work as hard because he was able to tag out and didn't have to stay in there as long. So I'm finding myself having more respect for, I just found it really, like the amount of immature animals that was taken this year and the amount of people who came out early with like a less than, completely credible excuse just seemed to be higher than years past, and I feel like, is still on the incline.
Mm-hmm. I think so. And I mean, it's tough. Like, it's tough hunting. And it's not, it's even like I said to my wranglers this year, I always say to them, I kind of joke, like, guiding's 98% bullshit and 2% glory photos.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of joking, but it's kind of the same for hunting. It's like, there's a lot of elements of sheep hunting, say for an example, or goat hunting that are not glamorous, and you kind of just get used to them, and you get comfortable. I guess I got a buddy in Alaska, Adam Smith, and he does a lot of goat hunts and sheep hunts and stuff like that. And he often talks about that. It's like, it's just about getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And once you kind of mentally accept that, you ride that wave and you're like, all right, like, look, I'm not going to die. So I'm just going to ride this out. And that's oftentimes, like you said, right? That's what it takes to be successful, is like, how long can you ride this out? Sometimes that's, it's you obviously need to have the right skill set and knowledge and how to navigate terrain and, understanding thermals and all of that kind of stuff. That's huge. Absolutely huge. But if you understand all that, or you're the fittest guy on earth and you can't hack it mentally for more than 5 days, or you start to get sketched out because of, you saw a grizzly bear around your camp, or your legs started to get a bit sore or whatever. It's like, there's going to be more things nagging on your brain on a big backpack sheep or goat or even mule deer hunt, any extended backpack hunt. There's going to be more things nagging on your brain that are giving you good reasons why you shouldn't be here.
100%.
Then there are ones saying this is good to stay. But once you can once you can ignore that, once you can just move past that, it's like, you just don't think about it anymore.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. Yeah. And there should be certain levels of enjoyment. Like I always used to say, like there were hunters and gatherers for a reason. And my one issue, and we don't have time to get into it tonight because it's getting it's getting pretty late. But I do think one of the issues that I have had with the narrative of social media and hunting is that it's like for everyone. Anyone can be a hunter. And like, I kind of personally have a fundamental philosophical disagreement with that. I don't think it was made. I don't think everybody was made to be a hunter. And I think if you go out on one or two physically challenging backcountry hunts, like you're going to know pretty quickly. And I don't say that in like a condescending manner. Like there's lots of shit that other people are good at that I suck at. And I think it's important to acknowledge that like also this may just not be your thing. You know what I mean? Because for people who are into it, there is a lot more, I don't want to say there's more enjoyment, but like there's a lot less of the time that I have to force myself to be out there than I feel like some people who contact me looking for help are. And they seem to be really like convincing themselves to stay out there, where it's like, I kind of have to convince myself to go home because if I don't, my wife might leave me. But like, if it wasn't for that, I would probably just get some fresh food and like go back for round two.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. I think it is something that, I do feel that it's either kind of in you or it isn't. And I think there's people who dabble in that space. I've had friends in the past where I grew up in Ontario that maybe did a season or two of duck hunting. And it would be mostly me saying, hey, let's go out Saturday morning. I'll pick you up at this time or meet me at this gate at this time or whatever. And they totally loved it and had a great time. But since I moved away, that, might have hunted once or twice or since or something. And that's like 8 years ago. And in the same way, you can have, like I've got a good buddy who's a bigger dude and he's, working on getting into better shape for hunting and stuff like that. But certainly it's not like he can just run around in the mountains super easy. And, he was telling me his first hunt, he got his ass handed to him, completely skunked, and was just hooked after that. So I think there is that, like, it's, you either love it regardless of the situation or you don't. And if you love it, you're going to stick with it through thick and thin. And then I think there's probably a spectrum in between of people who love certain aspects of it. Like maybe they love that it brings out, this chat, like they're the part of them that needs really difficult challenges to overcome, or they like this aspect, but not like they don't love it as a whole. And I think when you love it as a whole, you can ride through any of that. And just like you said, you're not focused on, things other than like, hey, I have a family at home that I need to get back to at the end of this hunt. Otherwise, I would just live out here for 12 months of the year. Yeah. Completely feral.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. I understand that one. Yeah.
Listen, man, I think that's an excellent note to wrap things up. I got to get you back on because there's a few topics we didn't get a chance to discuss, but I'm sure no matter how long we talk, that will be the case. Obviously, I'll put Nolan's Instagram and the journal and all that kind of stuff in the show notes. So I'd be pretty surprised if the people who listen to my podcast don't already listen to yours, but just in case they don't, I will forward them on that information. Anything you want to say, share, pass on as we wrap things up, man?
God, I wish I had something
profound,
something profound to say.
Yeah.
Nah, I think people just, we're going into a new season here in BC. I hope everyone just gets out there and gets after it and, push yourself and don't be stupid about it and get yourself in situations that'll kill you. But, maybe those things that have been, if there's those hunts that you've always wanted to do, if you've always wanted to get up north for a sheep hunt or an elk hunt, like you can always start baby steps. You don't have to go all the way in on a deep fly in or something like that, but just kind of move past the excuses and try and get after it. Have fun.
Awesome. All right. For everybody listening, as always, if you could share, comment, subscribe, the engagement is greatly appreciated. Nolan, greatly appreciate the time. It was a fantastic conversation. So thank you for making the time and hopping on.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed that.
All right. For everybody else, thanks for tuning in and we will see you next week. All right. Cheers, Nolan.
Thanks.